Hello everyone. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you all had a great week. And tonight we shall speak about empathy. Do you know how to empathize? And the reason we're discussing that is it's part 2 of a series that we'll be doing through these 7 weeks between Passover and Shavuos, which is the traditional time of counting the Omer. Which, if you're not familiar with that custom, it's a custom that we count 49 days, 7 weeks, 7 times 7. That begins the second night of Passover and goes all the way till Shavuot, which actually means weeks. The holiday of Shavuot means weeks. That's what it means. And it's a countdown that the Jews counted when they left Egypt. They counted down in anticipation for the great revelation at Sinai. In addition, the Torah actually says that you shall count. It's a way of measuring the time between Passover that designates when the holiday of Shavuos would be. But its personal relevance, which is the focus I always address this class, is personal relevance. Who cares? All these ideas may be very beautiful biblical commandments, and that tells us about our history and about traditions and rituals. But the biggest question is, why should I care? Why should I care? What relevance does it have to my life? We live in a world where we have a very wide array, large menu of options. Especially today with the internet, you're just a click away from anything. And with all the options out there, there's a lot of competition for someone's attention. So it's even more important today to be able to demonstrate why should someone care about Judaism in general and about any of these Jewish traditions in particular. So I find this actually as a very exhilarating challenge, because you have to rise to the occasion and dig deeper to demonstrate the spiritual and emotional and psychological and personal relevance of these ideas. And actually it's not that difficult once you really dig. So the counting of the Omer happens to be perhaps the first ever character development program, personality development, and personality character refinement, what some people call self-help, what others call self-actualization, whatever name you give for it. But it goes back that every day when you look in a siddur, in a prayer book, and when we count the Omer, you'll find that every day has, besides the number of the day, has a corresponding emotional attribute. And there are 7, according to the Kabbalists and the Hasidic masters, there are 7 emotional attributes, beginning from love, chesed, gevura, which is discipline, compassion or empathy, which we'll be addressing this week, is the 3rd week. Number 4th week is netzach, endurance, ambition. Number 5th week is haid, which is humility or yielding. And 6, foundation or bonding, connection. And finally 7 is dignity. So I decided this year to take each week's class and be focusing on one of them. This week is the week 3 of empathy. And 7 times 7 is because each of the 7 emotional attributes has 7 sub-emotions, so to speak. Basically 7 times 7 permutations. And every human experience, every human interaction, every one of our emotional feelings and reactions are a result of and an outgrowth of one of these 49 permutations. So when you really master it, you can actually identify your behavior by seeing which attributes are interacting. Whether it's our positive reactions to things, the things we're attracted to, the things where we are repelled, that repulse us, how we react angrily, our level of drive and ambition, our ability to be flexible. You name it, you can identify, you can actually map out, if you like, your own so-called spiritual genome of your emotional the spectrum of your emotions based on the understanding of these 49 days. So years ago, actually this class, unexpectedly, I was asked by some people in this class, I discussed this point, I would say going back to probably 1995, 94 maybe. And a few people asked me, so what are these 49 attributes? And frankly, I knew some of them, but I didn't know all of them. I went to ask some of my so-called colleagues and experts, and most people didn't know. So I did research, and I would give handouts in this class If you don't mind, Chava, give me the Omer book. Give me a copy of the Omer book, please. And I did these handouts. These just, regular pages. And after the next year, suddenly people were asking me for copies of these handouts. One day, one of the classes, there was an artist here, a calligraphist. And she came over to me, and she was a calligrapher. She was doing her drawings during my class. She showed me an image of the class, like she captured the themes and the ideas on this beautiful, canvas. And then she said to me, I have an idea. Do you mind if I take our handouts and design it? And so that's what she did. She designed it in this size book. She made it very earthy looking, representing a type of personal workbook, refinement. Did it this type of exactly, almost like a notepad type. And she actually designed it. And for each of the 7, she made an image. And unexpectedly, I didn't even expect it to be a book. And suddenly it took off. We self-published it. I couldn't get a publisher for this because it's a little out of the ordinary. And I want to say probably we've sold over 100,000 copies. Which is pretty good for a self-published book without any promotion and marketing. I'm not saying this to impress you. It just showed me that it resonated with people. That's how a book works. It resonated. Anything that's word of mouth and people share is purely resonance. When you market and you promote, you could say people bought it they saw a lot of advertisements and they thought it's promised something. And sometimes people buy something and doesn't deliver on this promise. In this case, as it is with the things that really resonate, people share it. If it resonates, you give it to someone else. And it's become something that is a phenomenon. As a result, I began to develop it into workshops. And actually this year we turned it into a mobile app. And as well as, I don't know if any of you saw the little cartoon we made on YouTube called Emotion Picture. Emotion. So it was like a little 2-minute 7 characters in an office of these 7 emotions. If you haven't seen it, check it out. It's pretty cool. So on YouTube you could just look up Emotion Picture or something, or My Omer. And what it does is, it's deceptively simple because the book is very short. Each day has this, I would say it's a small little page, but it focuses on a particular one of 49 elements of your personality. So let's just take, for example, where we are tonight. I'll just use that as an example. Before I begin, I just want to dedicate the class for one sad memory of a beautiful soul that just passed away, Cheskel Ben Shendel. May his soul go where it has to go and give strength to his family. And may our learning here contribute to that journey. And also, for many healthy good years, I want to say happy birthday to our own dear Chava. And we would have had her birthday cake had I known. I just heard a little story about that. I had written once a story about why Jews, and in Judaism we find that we use candles all the time. In the temple there was a menorah. We light Shabbos candles, we light Hanukkah candles, we light holiday candles, and God forbid a yahrzeit. There's a yahrzeit candle. Flames are a very big theme in Judaism. And I was talking about how our role is to be living menorahs and walking menorahs. So someone told me they were at a birthday party, and they brought out a birthday cake. And the girl, I think, would turn to 7 or 8. So they had 8 candles. And as the custom in the land, the custom of our country is, they say, blow out the candles. And the little girl refused. And they asked her, why don't you blow out the candles? She says she learned that by us Jews, we light candles. We don't blow out candles. Candle is a sign of life. It's a sign of light. It's just, why would you blow out light on your birthday? You would do the opposite. So I just thought it was very moving. So maybe this is a new custom we can initiate, that maybe have the birthday child or birthday girl or boy light 8 candles or 9 candles. In your case, 18 candles. Yeah. So, just a thought. That's just an aside. So, in birthday to Chava, so the class is also dedicated to that. Now, to go back to the theme of empathy. So, as I said, each night we count, but we also focus on a particular aspect of our personalities. And the fact is that if you do this consistently, you'll be amazed, number one, at the insight you get about yourself. Because it's one thing you say, you know what, I'm in a bad mood, I'm in a good mood, I'm in an angry mood, I'm in a benevolent mood. Those are general terms. Anything that's general is like a platitude. What does it mean? But if you're forced to define it in detail, like, 1 second, okay, I'm loving, but what's missing in my love? I'm giving too much love to my children and spoiling them. Or I'm giving too little love. So there you could focus and say, okay, the love is there, but it's misplaced, or it's not temperate, which would be Gvura Shebechesed. So each night has its own particular attribute, each night and day, I should say. And as we are now in the week, we're now in the week 3, and we began counting, as I said, the second night of Passover, which was actually a Tuesday night. So Tuesday night, so this would be the second day of the third week. So it would be Gvura of Tiferes. That's where we are right now. So I'll focus on that in a moment, just to use that as an example. But I want to talk about empathy, because number one, we have to understand what this faculty is and its role in our lives. So I guess it's also always a good way to begin. Is many people are impressed. You start quoting Torah, people think it's primitive or ancient. You quote science and neuroscience, and suddenly people say, oh, they get their attention because it's scientific. But it's fascinating to me always to find the parallels between scientific ideas and Torah ideas and mystical ideas. And they're really amazing, the parallels. And they're not forced. They're really powerful. But let's start with the neuroscience. Empathy lately has many new findings about the nature of empathy. What is empathy? Empathy is defined usually as the ability to feel, to understand, to be sensitive to another person's feelings. So like any good scientist asks the question, why? Why do we have this feeling? Why? So strict evolutionists, radical evolutionists, let's say, like Richard Dawkins, everything is driven by the selfish gene, as the title of his book, will argue that everything is for the selfishness of a human being. Empathy is because if I empathize with you, you'll empathize with me. It creates a community. There's personal selfish benefits. Really turning over anything that's noble and beautiful, just turning it into yet another selfish exercise. Which I always find, a little disturbing. Everything. Even the greatest altruism is because the selfish gene has to survive. The Torah's view is actually quite different, because the Torah's view is that we are fundamentally noble creatures, created in the divine image. We have a soul. And not the id, but the yid, the spark. The divine spark is the real driving force inside of a human being. And as such, we have many layers, obviously, and we obviously have temptations and we have distractions. But at the core of it, we are divine creatures. And as such, we have the capacity to achieve great heights, and not just for selfish reasons. So the element of empathy is always plagued, especially modern thinkers, because where does it come from? What benefit is there in empathy? Now, I know many of us just who are empathetic and who have compassion are not going to ask this question. It seems like the decent thing to do. If you see someone in pain, that you should also somewhat feel pain. It's considered insensitive and callous if someone's suffering and you're just detached and indifferent. It hurts us. But the question is, what exactly is going on? So one of the things neuroscientists have discovered, what they call today mirror neurons. I don't know if you've heard this expression, mirror neurons. It means exactly what it is, that there are neurons within us that mirror experiences. The classic example is that if you see somebody, for example, you see their hand get caught in the door, you will often cry out ouch before they do. You don't need to be analyzed or to be explained. You immediately sense it. It's almost like you cringe when you see someone else about to be in pain or is in pain. They call that mirror neurons, because for some reason there's a connection between our mind and our experiences and someone else's experience. Now, if you study quantum mechanics, where we understand that there's an integral unity that connects all brains and all minds and all people, it's not surprising at all that maybe there is something that's happening in each of us that another person relates to. Now, usually day-to-day grind of life we don't sense it, but when there's an extreme like a trauma, a pain, or a joy, we identify and we mirror it. And they did tests, especially in animals with monkeys. They usually do these tests, and they discovered that there is that element of empathy, that even animals will react when they see the pain of another, will have a certain type of identification with it and relate to it. Empathy has also been shown in many studies to actually have benefit in people's lives. People who have empathy have more connection, less anxiety, less stress, and obviously the converse is also true. When there's lack of empathy and there's more self-absorption, more stress, less flexibility, and even brings to illness and so on. Obviously, none of these are automatic things that just a little empathy and suddenly everything is healed. It's a general state of mind and general disposition, essentially, that has this impact. We'll soon talk about the Torah perspective that long before science and neuroscience and psychology, the Torah has much to say about empathy. And it's actually this week, the counting of the Omer is the week of empathy. There's another study, which I think they call the 100th monkey study, that was sometime experiment that was done in the 1950s. They studied, I think, in one of the Galapagos, one of the islands out there. They studied monkeys and wanted to study their behavior. So this was the test, the experiment. They put monkeys love. One of their delicacies is what is it?
Bananas?
No. That is we call them potatoes, not regular potatoes. No, potatoes, but not white potatoes. What's the other? Sweet potatoes. Sweet potatoes. Just lost me. Sweet potatoes. So they buried sweet potatoes at the edge of a beach, but buried in the sand and the grime. If you know monkeys eat, they clean what they eat. As a matter of fact, I discovered how you're actually supposed to peel a banana from a monkey. I was in the zoo once with my kids years ago, and I saw a banana. We peel usually what we call the top, which is hard. You peel it, it doesn't always work. They peel it what we would call the bottom, and it's far smoother. Try it out. From the bottom, not where the stem is, but the bottom, what we that's where they peel it from, and it's very, very smooth peel, and the banana is intact. Hey, listen, you come all the way here from Boston to hear how to peel a banana. You never know what you learn. So this was this thing with the sweet potatoes. They buried in the sand, and in this case, it's been studied that, especially with monkeys and also other animals, usually the young learn from the parents how to hunt, how to eat, and so on. In this case, one of the new young monkeys discovered the sweet potatoes and actually was ingenious in finding a way to clean it up. They took the potatoes to the water, washed it off, and then rubbed it off. Like a whole procedure of how to get these potatoes and eat them cleanly. And monkeys are not known to know how to do this. This was like something that you saw the creativity of the monkey, but that's not where the experiment. That wasn't the big achievement. Everyone's adaptable. Monkeys are intelligent, and they found a way to clean the potato. But the monkey began showing her mother, or his mother, how to do the same thing. And they kept burying these sweet potatoes. So the monkeys were all gathering, and they were all learning from one another. At some point, okay, that's not a surprise. One monkey trained another. Here's potatoes. Here's how you clean them. At some point, what happened was, I don't know the exact number. They called the 100th monkey. Something happened that was like miraculous. Suddenly, monkeys that were not trained on the island were doing exactly the same thing. And more importantly, monkeys on other islands that they planted the same thing with the sweet potatoes were also doing it without any direct training. It was like a critical mass was struck, and suddenly monkey psychology changed, and they were all able to do it. So one of the theories is the mirror neurons, that something actually changed in the neurology of the monkeys, that when there were enough people doing it, there was like that type of empathy. So in other words, why when I look at you and you're in pain, why would I react? I mean, you're not me, you're not an extension of me. I react if I have pain in my finger. Why would I react if you have pain in your finger? So the theory goes, mirror neurons, that there's like a invisible link. It's not just I see it with my eyes, there's some link that your pain connects to me. Anyway, you can look this up. This is not my science, this is out there. I was checking it out today, and I've read it many times, but it's very fascinating. There are many, many more examples of this. So, however you want to understand it, the bottom line is that empathy is a very interesting power, And it has impact on us. Because of course you can play the devil's advocate and say, hey, there are other people that are so insensitive, they see other people's pain and they don't feel anything. But it's not usually the case. Unless you are particularly psychopathic, or particularly like closing your eyes to somebody else's pain. Like, look, the Germans were able to exact pain on innocent children, innocent people, and they had no issue with it. Not only didn't have empathy, they're actually the ones that perpetrated it. So clearly, of course, any person can become an animal. Every person can become and program themselves, especially when they were trained and they were the propaganda to see Jews as vermin and see them as insects. So it becomes, insensitive to it. But naturally, most people will have an empathy. An empathy even not just to human species, even to animals. It's just that we always can become insensitive as well. And as I said, empathy has that impact. The impact of actually benefiting our lives. As I said, I don't need to make a case, I'm assuming to most of us here, all of us here, that empathy has value. It's the basis of so much of life. Children, family, but also strangers and so on. So, I want to now take it back that long before neuroscience and long before these studies that I've just described, long before any of these ideas were developing in the modern world, and some can argue that in the ancient world, empathy was not necessarily valued. I just remember a few years ago, you all remember the earthquake in Haiti, right? So, it was amazing to see the humanitarian effort. Obviously, there's plenty of corruption and so on. I'm not going to deny that, but the fact is, nations from around the world came around to save it, to help a poor nation that has been pillaged, that has been suffering, and a nation that was completely vulnerable. Why is this amazing? You don't have to be a advanced student of history to know that history is fraught with one story after another, that nations never went to help fellow nations. What purpose? Why would they do that? If there was a natural disaster in Rome or in ancient Greece, you know what happened. That was the end of the empire. The disaster was exploited by its neighbors. It exposed the vulnerability, and they came to pillage it, to rape the country of all its resources, and to take over. That's the story of history. So the war was war, but when there was a natural disaster, no, why would any nation go and expend resources to help another nation? So the mere fact that we have that attitude today is also is progress. Now, of course, some will argue and be cynical and say, okay, the reason America does it is because they want to develop another fertile marketplace for McDonald's and Apple computers or whatever it is. But the fact is, this country not only tolerates but supports billions of dollars of charity to other countries. Why don't the taxpayers rise up and say, why our money going to third world countries or other countries? Why don't we just spend it right here? Give it back to us. Don't take it from us. So there's a certain beauty in this type of humanitarian element that once didn't exist. So there's an empathy that there's no question, historically at least. I'm not saying individually we're necessarily all more and more refined, but historically, clearly, the world is far more advanced in that sense, and nations will spend money to help another nation, even at no benefit to themselves, or at least not direct benefit, immediate benefit. But the power of empathy, therefore, today is not surprising, because we see it. We see it's valued. We live in a world where charity, more charity has been given by Americans and by the American government than any unprecedented in history. And yet, you'd think that back then it wasn't the case. But if you look in the Torah, the whole Judaism and the entire Torah is built on empathy. It's all built on empathy. As a matter of fact, there's a statement in the book of Proverbs that says the Torah is Dracheh darchei noyam. Its ways are sweet ways, and all its ways and all its paths are paths of peace. Its ways are beautiful, its ways are pleasant, and all its paths are paths of peace. The Rambam, Maimonides, actually states an interesting law. I know it's not connected to not Hanukkah now, but it's connected to Hanukkah. In Judaism, every detail is split into details, into understanding the different intricate laws. So there's a question that's asked: if Hanukkah and Shabbos fall out together, so we know we have to light 2 candles, one for Hanukkah and one for Shabbos. But let's say you only have sufficient funds or sufficient candle, only 1 candle. Should you light a Shabbos candle with a blessing on the Shabbos candle, or should you light a Hanukkah candle? Now the argument could be made that you'd light a Hanukkah candle. Why? Because Hanukkah is only once a year. Shabbos is 52 times a year. So it seems that the thing that's more unique, do that. Shabbos is always next week. The answer is no. There's actually a disagreement in the Talmud that talks about there's a concept of tadir and eino tadir. If something is done all the time, and another thing is only unique, exclusive, happens very rarely or once a year, which one takes precedent? But in this case, actually, Shabbos takes precedent, and the Talmud and the Maimonides writes why. It says Hanukkah's candle has purpose. The purpose of the candle of Hanukkah, the flame of Hanukkah, is to celebrate the miracle. To persumanis is the expression. To announce, to celebrate the miracle that everyone sees with a flame that lights into the dark in the night. This was the miracle. It's an announcement, it's a declaration. What is the purpose of lighting Shabbos candles? It's to preserve shalom bayis, harmony at home, domestic peace. Shalom bayis, that you should have peace between husband and wife. And Maimonides continues and says the peace between husband and wife, peace in the family, compassion at home, is so important that the entire Torah was given just because of that. And he actually cites a law, a very interesting law. There's a law in the Talmud called the law of Soita, where a woman is accused of infidelity. And there's a whole way to test whether she's telling the truth or not. And God says, erase my name. This is part of the tradition, part of the mitzvah is to take the name of God and put it on a parchment. And the name and erase the name and see what effect it has. God says, erase my name in order to preserve harmony between husband and wife. Now, erasing God's name in Judaism is considered a pretty serious crime. It's a holy name. But here God actually intentionally says, don't use religion to separate a husband and a wife. Erase my name, because that's how important preserving peace is. And that's why the lighting Shabbos candle takes precedent to lighting Hanukkah candle. So the idea of harmony, the idea of sensitivity, the idea of compassion or empathy, the Hebrew word for it is rachmanis, rachamim, is one of the highest attributes in Jewish thought and Jewish life. As a matter of fact, it's not only between human beings, but talk about Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur. One of the things we keep invoking in Yom Kippur services, if you may recall, is called the Yud Gimel Midas HaRachmim, the 13 attributes of divine compassion. We keep repeating it. Now, what is the 13 divine attributes of divine compassion? It's based on that when the Jews had built the golden calf after receiving the Torah, which was a very cardinal sin, a real betrayal of God, Moses marched back up on the mountain and asked God, besieged God to forgive the people. And God refused. But Moses was adamant and insisted, and he kept on praying for them until finally God reveals to him the secret, what's called the secret of the Yud Gimel Midas HaRachmim, the secret of the 13 attributes of empathy or compassion. And in Yom Kippur, Moses comes down the mountain receiving God's forgiveness. And the reason Yom Kippur is the holiest day of the year, many people wonder, why is it the holiest day of the year? Is because that's the day when we have the birth of hope. Every human being makes mistakes. But hope, forgiveness, the ability to repair after a break, that is a true divine element. And Moses was able to prevail and achieve that on Yom Kippur, and that's why Yom Kippur is the day of compassion. It's a day where you go out of your way. What is compassion? Compassion doesn't mean the other person that's getting the compassion deserves it necessarily. Love, kindness, you could say, I'll be kind to someone who deserves kindness. If they don't deserve kindness, my judgment tells me they don't deserve it. Why should I be kind to someone that doesn't deserve it? Compassion says that even though the person may not deserve it, they may be a criminal, but we still have mercy. We still will overlook. So it's a far deeper experience than just love. It's an experience that even though someone may have hurt you, something that and they may deserve not to get your favor, you still overlook it, and you have the ability to rise above and transcend your own feelings, and still have compassion. There's actually a story with one of the Hasidic Rebbes, the Rebbe Rashab. So he was once speaking to his son, and he said, the Talmud says that you're supposed to have rachmanis, compassion, empathy on everyone except a fool. That's what it says. Because a fool is a fool. You don't have compassion on a fool. That's what the Talmud says. So this is what his father said to him. He said, look, my son, Look how much empathy we have to have for a fool. That even the Torah says you shouldn't have empathy for him. That's how much empathy we have to have. You follow the thought. So the Torah is saying that because it's a certain type of understanding that persons can become wiser and shouldn't be a fool. But nevertheless, when you're a really empathetic person, you have empathy even for someone who the Torah says you don't have empathy. That also deserves empathy. So empathy is a divine gift, a divine secret that was revealed to Moses, and from the beginning of time it became a fundamental principle in Jewish life. And this week we honor that empathy by recognizing and by analyzing, exploring and diagnosing our own empathy. So there I was going to just go into, as I said, each of the 7 days has its own particular aspect or element of empathy. Obviously, the first question one has to ask themselves is, how do we empathize? And I remember at this class once, someone asked me the question, what is our obligation to a homeless person? You're walking down the street of Manhattan, and you see someone lying there, and they have a little cup or whatever it is. You may even know that they may use the money for alcohol or drugs or nothing that is constructive. What's our obligation? Should we help them? Should we not help them? Many of us, our hearts go out and we throw them a coin. And that was the question. So I returned the question. I said, okay, it's an excellent question, but let's analyze this for a moment. If you're really so compassionate, why are you just throwing them a coin? Why don't you invite them to dinner? Oh, no, it may be dangerous. I don't need someone that's dirty in my house. In other words, your empathy is limited to your comfort zone, basically. And what happens if a day walks by and you're in a very bad mood or a nervous mood, and you suddenly see this guy, this homeless person, and they make you nervous and say, what are they doing here? Let them clean up the streets. So suddenly one day you're not in the mood of it, so you don't throw them a coin. So who exactly determines empathy? Just because you feel bad? Is our feeling bad the barometer, the litmus test of determining what is true empathy or not? See, the Torah challenges us to think about this. Now, I'm not suggesting for a person that has a feeling, obviously, if you feel empathetic to someone, obviously you do whatever it takes to help someone. I'm not trying to challenge that. But if you really want to look at your own so-called psyche, understand yourself, it's important to know why and the motivation if one really wants to work on empathy. Empathy, like anything, and I think I should add this, should have said it earlier as an introduction, it's a critical introduction, and that is, we all understand that the physical human body, the physical body, has different elements to it. We have muscles, we have nerves, we have blood vessels, we have a whole body, we have a skeleton, and we have different vitamins, minerals, that nourish different components of the body. When you eat healthy foods, you take the right vitamins and supplements and so on, you nourish that part. If, God forbid, there's a lack of something, a deficiency, so we try to supplement it with something to keep it going. The exact same truth is with the soul. The soul is also made up of components. It's not just this soul, I have a soul life. The soul is also made of components. This most people are not aware of. And it's an intricate structure. So just like there's a physical DNA, there's a spiritual DNA. As I mentioned before, a spiritual genome. The 49 days period that we're in now, the Omer, are 49 components, actual components of a soul. Now they're not tangible like a muscle and a nerve and a blood vessel, but they're absolutely real. So when we, for example, are kind to somebody, chesed, love, we're loving. So most of us think of it as, okay, the right thing to do is to be kind to people. We essentially see it as like almost an obligation, or even something we find very pleasant. If you were blessed with something, you should share. Why not be kind? Why not help another? But we don't think about it the other way around. If chesed and love and kindness is an actual component in your soul, when you give, you're actually exercising that muscle called love. So you may be getting more in return than the person who's receiving. And it actually says that in the Medrash, that Yesir Mamasha Balabais, Esim Ma'ani, Esim Balabais, which means more than the giver Hanesin and the makabel, the more than the giver is giving to the recipient is giving to the giver. Yes, financially, if it's money or food or other gift, obviously the one that's receiving is receiving the tangible. But who knows how much is nourishing that component in you called chesed. And when you don't love and you're not kind, think of it like this. Think of a muscle that can go into atrophy that's not being used. Think of your arm just sitting there without use. So of course there's that prerequisite joke about the guy that was looking for a heart transplant, and they asked him whose heart he wants. So he said, what are the options? So they told him a bunch of people, and he chose the heart of the miser in the town. He said because he wants a new heart, one that was never used. But that is not actually appropriate. Actually, a used heart is far better than a new heart, because it's like muscles. You don't want new muscles. You want muscles that are worked through, that have muscle tone and have been developed. So each one of our human attributes, the spiritual attributes, just like the physical, need exercise. They need nourishment. They need to be fed, and they're fed by doing certain things. So this is not just about our obligation to others. That's not the right thing, to have compassion, to be empathetic, to be kind, and the other 7 emotions that I was discussing earlier. It's actually perhaps and more does for you than it does for another, because you're actually feeding and nourishing that part of your life, which of course throws the whole equation upside down, because most of us are naturally narcissists and selfish. What does that mean? I'm not trying to accuse you all of being selfish people. It's just that people first think about their own needs before they think about other people's needs. That's how it works. You wake up in the morning, the first hunger you feel is your own, not someone else's. Then your mind tells you, you should be also considerate. You have a family and kids and so on. But the bottom line is, by nature, we sense ourselves. So the concept of mirror neurons that I elaborated on before, the idea that you can empathize, you see someone else in pain and you could cry out, ouch, if you see their finger getting stuck, God forbid, in the door before they do, is because there is some type of connection that is there between us, and above all, that is a nourishing element in our own spirits. Why empathy and love is healthy is not just because it's healthy for society, for those that have to share, but it's healthy for an individual to breathe. What is the nature of a selfish entity? A selfish entity is called self-contained. Look in nature, what happens to self-contained entities? Things that are locked up. All infections, all disease, everything unhealthy happens in closed quarters. Look at an infection, God forbid, in the body. Where does it fester? When there's no fresh air, when it's locked up, when it's closed, and when it begins, that's where bacteria thrive, in dark and in closed quarters. Fresh air fights illness and infection. The same as psychologically. A type of ghetto mentality where people are just supporting each other, only people that are like themselves, tend to create far more infections, spiritual ones and psychological ones, than an open society. Because everybody's reinforcing their own problems. So when there's a problem, it's never resolved. Everybody's just part of the same problem. It's part of the same community. I don't know if any of you ever read the short story called The Lottery. It was required reading when we were in high school. And not yeshiva, that is, in the secular high school. So The Lottery is a very short story, and it provokes teenagers to think. Anybody familiar with this story? I'll just tell it to you briefly. It's quite chilling, the end of it, but till you get to the last line, literally, you don't know what the story is about. So the short story goes like this. It's a town, beautiful town, beautiful people, and families and children, and everything seems perfect. They have an interesting custom, however. Once a year they have a party, they have a celebration. And the whole story is about how they prepare for the celebration. Take off from school, go shopping, buy gifts. You think a big holiday is coming. It's a holiday. You have no idea what the holiday is about. And the whole thing keeps building up. How this family is buying gifts, and this one's buying clothing, and the children are excited, and the parents are this. The whole town is so united. Everybody seems to be part of the same party. It's like beautiful, actually. And the end of the story, what happens is the big day comes, everybody dresses up in the finest clothing. They all come to the center of the town, the square, the center of the square of the, what they call center square. I don't think that's correct, but whatever. It works. You get the idea. And they're all dressed up, men, women, and children, the little children, everything. It's like the biggest event. And what they do is they throw a lottery. Everybody puts their name in a hat or a bag, and they pick a name out. And that person who they pick, this is the end of the story, the last few lines, is stoned to death by the entire community. And that's it. And everybody goes home, gets dressed, changes clothing, and goes back to life. They have this custom. And I remember when our teacher taught it to us, of course they ask, we were 14-year-olds, whatever, so what do you learn from this? I remember it was like, the first thing you learn is about conformity, how people, everything could be right, but they have this custom and no one questions it. That's it, that's their custom. They stone someone to death. That's simply by a lottery. And that's it. They've been doing that for, since the beginning of time. Obviously, many lessons can be learned, but one of the things that always remained with me was that type of, I guess it resonated with me, in the sense where people, there's a thing called herd mentality. You know what herd mentality is? Like a herd, like a stade behemoth in Yiddish they say. A herd. If you see these cowboys or people who are herdsmen, what they do is they get a few cows running a certain way, all the other cows run automatically. I mean, there's different tests that have shown this. Maybe this is another form of mirror neurons working in a destructive way. You wanted to say something or ask something?
Yeah, I think, isn't there a concept in the Torah for when giving tzedakah is first giving to your family, then to your community, then like charity starts at home kind of thing?
So first of all, what's the contradiction to anything I've said? That's a matter of priorities. It could be priorities. But the Torah where does the Torah say that one should not have empathy to anybody on earth? Every Torah person was the most empathetic. Look, I mentioned Moses was up on the mountain. He was not part of the sin of the golden calf, and yet he prayed for Rachmanis, for Yud Gimel Midas Harachamim on a people that betrayed God. So it wasn't his family, you can say, it was the Jewish people. The Torah is based, as I mentioned, I gave you all the sources before, is based on compassion. Kol Nisivoseh Shalom Udracheh Darkei Noyam is the expression. All its ways are ways of pleasant ways, and all its ways of peace. Now I understand, you could say, well, we meet many Torah Jews or religious Jews and they're not very compassionate or kind. And you could ask them that question, how do they deal with that pasuk, that Torah verse, that the Torah, all of it is pleasant paths and all paths of peace. So, I can give you my analysis of it, but I talk about this all the time here. So let me just go back to what I was saying. Everything that is closed and doesn't have breathing will always cause problems. It's a rule of life. Look, we even have the taboo in history. And even, of course, according to the Torah for sure, incest. What is the taboo of incest? So even from a scientific point of view, is because incestuous relationships will usually create more disease. Look what happened when the monarchs in the last century or two, they would all intermarry. And you have higher rates of hemophilia and other diseases because there's no there's no diversification of the gene pool. It just shows you that fresh air or new experiences are critical to really creating healthy organisms. So in that sense, when a person is completely self-absorbed and contained, psychologically, just like disease festers, that's where all problems fester. So, yes, there are people who are extremely selfish. Everything is about me, me, me. The different forms of narcissism. There are regular narcissists. There are compulsive narcissists. There are, what do we call them? All different types of narcissists. I'm not going to go through every category here. But generally speaking, from this perspective, it's not just damage done to others that a person like that doesn't help other, which is itself a crime, of course, but above all, does more damage to the individual than to anyone else. Because it creates a self-contained relationship. Now, many people don't like to hear a new idea that contradicts their idea. What do we see? What do we call that? Why, if you're an intelligent person, why would you be afraid to hear another idea? So no one's going to say they're afraid. They're going to say, I'm so convinced that I'm right, that no other idea could ever really challenge that. And they're really truly people, I'm sure you've met one or two in your life, that no matter what you say, there's no way to challenge them. They're not interested in hearing any idea that's different than theirs. Even as a young guy, I always was wondered about that. I said to me, it always struck me as being very insecure. Obviously the defense of it is, I don't want to hear an idea that may contaminate my mind. Someone's going to challenge my position. Hey, suddenly I may have doubts. And if I have doubts, I may change or waver from my initial position. Many religious people will argue that. They'll say, I have my way. If I start bringing new ideas, it's dangerous. New ideas, start challenging. Frankly, I never really related to that, I have to say. I understand where it comes from, but I don't think it comes from a healthy place. Because if you actually are so secure and confident with your ideas, so what is the only way for you to maintain them is make sure you never hear another approach? In other words, the only way that you could be right is everybody else is wrong. How right is that? And how can any intelligent person really live with themselves and feel, that's right because that's what I know? The first sign of intelligence is the ability and the exploration, curiosity, the ability to see things in many ways. That doesn't mean you have to follow every way, but you open up a Talmud, there was no one that minced his words there. Nobody is ever silenced. Shammai says this, Hillel disagrees. This one cites a verse, this one cites another verse, and this one gives a counter argument. The whole thing is full of arguments, and it's perfectly fine. That's the way of intelligent people. Obviously, you want to have parameters. Some people argue just to argue. As I mentioned many times, there's healthy skepticism, there's unhealthy skepticism. Unhealthy skepticism is someone who just uses questions and skepticism, and they use their brilliant mind just to provide excuses. You have many people, they're very good at that. They always have an excuse. And the more brilliant they are, the better they know how to cover their tracks. Healthy skepticism is a person who hears an idea and will challenge himself even, or herself. Maybe I'll think of it a different way. That's the healthy idea. You stretch an idea by challenging it. And sometimes it's hard for us to do alone because we may be invested in it, so we bring in someone else. You'll see the best brainstorm sessions, the best ideas come out when you have many people arguing about it. And then you have to come to some type of, okay, what's the consensus? What do we come to? The best way to crystallize an idea, what's called in Judaism is called libun hilchasa, libun, which means like the whitening, the crystallization of an idea, is when you have counter arguments that challenge the idea, and then you always brings out the best of all worlds. Because if you challenge the idea, sometimes you come out with a better the adaptation, or you even go back to the original idea, but that at least I challenged it, and I know that I've explored other options, so now I'm most likely that may be correct. This is first sign of intelligence. But you'll find in many communities, and this is not the monopoly of religious people, it's monopoly of all conformists. It's called mind control. It's a threat of anything that's different. What's the first mitzvah that was given to the first Jew? To leave your land, your birthplace, and the home of your parents. Now, of course, the first time it will be, because his parents and his homeland were pagans. Terach, the father of Abraham, was a idol manufacturer. So, of course, you have to tell him to leave there to go find a purer place. But first of all, that's not accurate. It's true that he was an idol manufacturer, but Lech Lecha remains a mitzvah till this day. It's a eternal commandment to every person that you have to get out of your comfort zones. You have the expression "Havagayla l'mekayim Torah." You should go into exile even to study Torah. It is a critical component in life, a journey. Life is always a journey. The Jews left Egypt, and they went on a journey, 42 journeys to be exact. Even going into Egypt, why couldn't they come and just live in Israel? Once Abraham came to Israel, it's okay, he left his homeland. Now he's in a promised land. Him, his son Isaac, Jacob. Why are they forced suddenly to go to Egypt and start and get themselves into an exile, which we just celebrated, the Exodus from Egypt, etc.? Why? Because it's never healthy to remain in one place. You have to always be challenged. And that's the sign of growth, mobility. The sign of life is constant movement. The sign of death is paralysis, is being stuck in one place. Empathy is literally like a spout in a kettle that doesn't allow something to be just completely self-contained. And God created us in a way that we're able to see someone's pain and we can feel it. It's actually the greatest gift. It means you're able to breathe. It means you're able to see a perspective that's not your own. That's what empathy truly is. A person has rahmanus, has compassion for another entity, another human being, another experience. Obviously, as I mentioned before, we can lock ourselves up and not have empathy. There are sociopaths, there are psychopaths, and there are people so self-absorbed they don't see anything. I mentioned the story with, I think they say it was one of the students of the Maral of Prague, who was once a great student of his, and then he became a very wealthy businessman, and became a big miser, didn't give any charity. A Kamtzen, they call it. A person who was just completely selfish. And he was despised in his town, but he had enough money, didn't care about anyone. One day they say the Maral or whoever, his great teacher, came to see him. So of course he received him with all the honors. And when the Maral walks in there, he sees that this man had a collection of many different things. One of the collections he had were mirrors. He loved mirrors. A mirror. Mirror on the wall. Who's the most beautiful of them all. And Maral immediately realized what's going on here, so he said to him, so I see very impressive mirrors. And he asked him, he said, what's the difference between a mirror and a pane of glass? So of course the miser says to him, it's very simple. A pane of glass is just glass. When you smear silver on a pane of glass, it becomes a reflector. And what's the difference, Maral says? He says, well, a glass you could see through, you see others. In a mirror, you only see yourself. Well, this man was not a stupid man. He was once a great student of his. He understood the message quite well. I never heard the end of the story, whether it made an impact or didn't make an impact. It's always good to have a happy ending, so I'm sure he did tshuva and everything was great. But the bottom line is that it's an interesting way of looking at things. Looking at a mirror. Any of you ever looked into a mirror? Or none of you have that type of vanity? It would be interesting to know how many times you look into a mirror in the day. And if you pass a mirror, how long do you stand and look there? Especially if no one else is watching. Obviously, you're not going to be staring in a mirror when everybody's looking at you. But it's an interesting exercise, what we do in the privacy when no one's watching. And a mirror, there were actually tzaddikim, they were great people, who never looked into a mirror. It was considered an act of vanity. There's no prohibition to it, but it was considered like, what are you looking when you're looking at yourself? What is exactly the point? So we understand, you have to groom yourself, you're going to appear to others, you go into a meeting, we have all the reasons. They say, I don't know which Rebbe was, I think it was the previous Gerer, one of the old Gerer Rebbes, or maybe Belzer Rebbe, the previous generation, they said that he never looked in a mirror, and he never saw a picture of himself. Because many of them also avoided pictures, for the same reason. It was not a thing to... And once, that's the way they tell the story, once he was shown a picture of himself. And he said, Ahelikeid. That's what he said, a holy Jew. Not realizing he's speaking about himself, because he never saw a picture and didn't see a mirror image. It's the story they tell. So I guess it's too late for us, because most of us know what we look like, right, at this point. But the point I'm just trying to make is that there's an element in truth of that. Imagine people who only see others, they don't see themselves. Now this does not negate what Hillel said, Im ein ani li mili, if I'm not for myself, who will be for me? The Torah is based on a principle called chayecha koidmin, which means that if you're traveling in a desert and you have water, and there's only water for two people, as a matter of fact, and you control it, you're supposed to drink it yourself first. Like fasten the seatbelt first on your own before you fasten someone else's. Or the oxygen mask, they always announce, put it on yourself before you put it on someone else. That's not because the Torah is advocating selfishness, because there's an element of responsibility for your life. And it may be reckless if you change that. But at the same time, there's a second half of Hillel's statement, which is imanila atzmi. If I'm only for myself, what am I? So the truth is, a healthy human being has two elements. There's obviously an element of not being reckless or careless with your own life, with your own needs. But there's a whole different story of being self-absorbed. And self-absorbed is, the antidote to that is true empathy. Now the interesting thing is, you can't really command people to have empathy. Nowhere does it say in the Torah, mitzvah l'rachim. Actually, it does say expressions like that, kol ha'merachim al habriyos, but it's hard to tell somebody, go have empathy. And yet there is a mitzvah in the Torah that says, v'ahavta l'recha kamocha. Love a fellow. So the Maggid of Mezrich, the Mezritcher Maggid, who was a great student of the Baal Shem Tov, basically the Hasidic movement, the Baal Shem Tov is the founder, the Maggid was his great student, and he had many students who would become the different dynasties. So the Maggid of Mezrich asked a very interesting question. How can you command someone on an emotion? You can command someone to keep Shabbos, to eat kosher, to do not do something. But how could you command on demand an emotion? Either you feel it or you don't feel it. How can you tell someone love? You could tell them do something nice with someone even if you don't love them. But how could you command the v'ahavta? Both the mitzvah of loving another fellow and also loving God, for that matter. So I said action can be legislated. How could you legislate emotions? Which would suggest that you're told to love somebody. What happens if I don't feel love for this person? How am I supposed to suddenly turn it on? It's a very powerful question. And his answer is that the mitzvah is on the hisbanenus, what he calls, on the contemplation on things that bring someone to love someone. In other words, the mitzvah is for you to contemplate on the qualities of another person, so it will bring you to a feeling of love. So the next question, of course, is asked. So then the mitzvah should have said, not v'ahavta, it should say the mitzvah is to lizbainen or whatever, leida. There's different expressions. V'yadaita, you should know the qualities which will bring you to love. And the answer given is because the truth is we really have natural love for each other, the contemplation is only meant to reveal it. The Talmud Yerushalmi says the following, an interesting analogy. On loving another, it says that we are all like limbs of one organism. Limbs of one organism. Now look at a human being, a healthy human being. Is it conceivable that the right arm should hit the left arm? Not conceivable. Not in a healthy person. A disease where the immune system turns on itself is one of the worst possible diseases. So if all human beings were created by one God, and we're all part of one family, one limbs of one organism, so how can we hurt each other? How is it possible? The answer is we don't feel we're part of one organism, even though that's the fact. Hashem Echad, we say one God. There's not many gods. All entities in this universe are part of creation of that God. Look at nature. In nature, you talk about breathing, nothing is self-contained in nature. It's unbelievable. Today we study the intricacies of natural secrets under the water, in the heavens, birds, plants, even minerals. The ecosystem, it's miraculous, the fascinating coordination. You ever read how the food chain works? You can have algae in one place that is being eaten up, and 5,000 miles away, it will change the whole population of sea lions, which will in turn change the population of those that the sea lions eat, etc., multiply. I mean, it's just an unbelievable coordination. And no one even knows how deep it goes. If you change one thing, take the human body. Do you know how many cells are inside the human body? Anybody knows the number? It's a pretty big number. It's bigger than the American deficit. Far bigger. 75 trillion, not billion and not million. So think of it in dollars and cents. 75 trillion would be nice, right? So 75 trillion cells are inside of us. The fact that there could be so many in a small body like this itself is interesting. One cell mutation, can destroy a human being. One extra chromosome creates Down syndrome. One, not that. Now you could say, what's 175 trillion? I understand it doesn't cancel out. Well, today, take a computer program. You ever see a computer programming language? You could have millions of lines of code and add one dot, stick in a dot in there, and forget about it. The whole code won't work. One dot. Or take out a dot. So today we understand that things on microscopic levels, it's not about size. It's about quality. And one little thing, can change the whole picture. So just take the human body. Here's the little human body, 5-6 feet tall, 100 pounds, 150 pounds. We won't go more than that, 180 pounds, whatever. A small little body. How many systems are working together right now as you sit here, just for you to take one breath? We don't even think about it. The mechanisms necessary for a breath to go into your mouth, through your lungs, and then do whatever it does, give you oxygen and give you life. God forbid someone's struggling for breathing in a hospital and they need support. respirator, you suddenly realize, wow, it's a pretty big thing. That's one breath. We're talking about all the breaths we take. For your eye to work. Think of the eye. They create a camera which is emulating the eye. A camera is relatively not a complicated machine. The eye is very complicated. How light goes in. How do you even see things? You ever figure out, when you're looking at me now, what are you seeing? You're seeing me? You're seeing an image of me? You're seeing a reflection? Is it in your eye? Is it you're seeing here, or you're seeing it by you? Simple things like that. Now, I'm not suggesting we have to be masters of it. It just shows you just the amazing coordination. And what would happen if the body decided, one part of the body, God forbid, decided to shut down and say, I'm closing up shop, and no one in, no one out? It doesn't work that way. It's like the joke they tell, the analogy they give of a guy in a boat, in a rowboat, with 20 people on the rowboat, and he decides, everyone paid passage, and he decides to start drill a hole under himself. So they say, what are you doing? He says, listen, I paid for my seat, I'm drilling a hole. Yeah, but that hole is going to affect the whole boat. So the human body and nature are the best examples of self-contained entities are destructive. God forbid if there's a block anywhere in the human body where something should be flowing, there's big trouble. Even the smallest little thing, it could be in a small toe, and can create unbelievable havoc. So you have natural empathy in existence and in nature. Everything is relating to something else, and everything recognizes that need. Today you have, obviously, on YouTube you find how suddenly animals, where did I see this? It was a leopard that took a hippopotamus under its care, and it thinks it's its mother. So obviously these are more aberrations, anomalies, and not natural things. You have the stories of these lions that were brought up by two people, and the lions are not natural predators. And when they met them after years, you've seen these, right? Pretty amazing to see. But these, I would say, again, are anomalies. But nature, by definition, is an empathetic nature. Even though you'll say, 1 second, what about these predators in the wild? They just kill prey without rahmanas. Well, first of all, that's part of their nature. That's the balance. As a matter of fact, if they didn't kill prey, those animals would multiply and cause a lot more problems. There's a rule in nature that is a very interesting rule. The more a organism is consumed, the more it multiplies. For example, there are far more plants and vegetation than there are animals because they're consumed so much. There are far more insects than there are large animals. So there's a balance in there. If the larger animal predators will not kill the prey will multiply and destroy. There's a balance, there's a constant balance. It's only ones that screw up the balance, that destroy the balance, are human beings actually. Take human beings out of the equation and the balance is a very smooth one. Suggesting, in other words, that there's a natural give and take in all of existence, called mashpia mekabel, in the human body, in health. Anything healthy is in a state like that. We're the only creatures that can become narcissists and say, I'm closing up my shop, nobody in, nobody out. I take care of myself. And we can completely shut down our sensitivity, our natural empathy. So to go back to what the Maggid says, that naturally we all are one. God created in a way that He blinded us from seeing that, which is the source of all problems. If we all felt we were one, would anybody be able to hurt another person? Impossible. But we don't see that. So we're blind. A person will not sin unless there's a moment of insanity. What does that mean? Why? We see many people sinning, they're not very insane, they can't claim insanity plea. Because insanity here doesn't mean that you're insane medically, it means that you're blind. Would a healthy person put their hand in fire? Never. So if you put your hand in fire, it means either you don't know it's fire or you don't know that fire damages you. If one of us hurts another, it means either we don't know we're hurting them or we don't know it damages us. But that's the reality. So the Maggid is saying his bonus means contemplate on this fact. Contemplate that you can't exist without another. See, nature doesn't need to contemplate. Flowers know that if a bee doesn't come and take its nectar, those flowers will die and they will not pollinate. And therefore they allow them in. You see creatures, sharks and others that have these little fish that go and swim in their backs, and they'll protect them. Because if they don't, those fish eat off those little parasites, etc., etc. There's a tremendous balance, and every creature knows that it needs another. Here's an interesting, I remember there was someone who used to come to this class, they had a country home, they had a home in Montana. Montana is like one of the last wildernesses, natural wildernesses in America. And I don't mean wildernesses that were created by human beings to be a wilderness. I mean, the original wilderness. Not like Central Park, So as a wilderness, they always used to invite me. I always wanted to go, but I never ended up going. And they told me an interesting phenomenon. They live like not far from where the wilderness begins, and there's a creek of water there. A lot of salmon. The salmon come to spawn. Salmon spawn. When they spawn, the way it works is after they lay their eggs, they die. Now, listen to this. Eagles love salmon. So the eagles are waiting to eat these salmon. Now the eagles are perched up in like thousands of eagles perched in these clefts in the mountains that surround the water. And when the salmon starts swimming upstream to lay their eggs, literally at a 2-second interval, just literally seconds, all the eagles will come down and have their meals. But what's 2 seconds? They will not eat the salmon that does not lay its egg yet. They will always wait till after it lays its egg, and they will not eat it after it's dead. So they have to catch the salmon after they lay the egg and before they die, which is literally 5-6 seconds. So it's like this miraculous thing. The eagles just know that that's what they have to do. Why won't they eat the salmon before laying the eggs? Because number one, their next meal will be jeopardized. That's of course on that level. And secondly, you can say it's an element of keeping the balance. Because remember, they don't eat all the salmon. Plenty of salmon remain. After thousands of years, we still have plenty of salmon. If you had salmon for lunch or breakfast, you know that. As a matter of fact, there are far more salmon than eagles. But the interesting thing is, I remember when she told this to me, she said, "You can't believe it. Suddenly, like in this 5-second thing, they swoop down, they have their salmon, and they will not touch salmon after they're dead, and they won't touch them before they give birth." I mean, it's just one example. I'm just giving one of, there's millions of examples. If we human beings would emulate the animal world, we'd be far better humans. Which maybe explains a strange Talmud. The Talmud says that il-mole nitna Torah, if the Torah were not given, we would have learned tznius, modesty from a cat. We would have learned different features, different qualities from different animals. We also say in Pirkei Avot, it says, and every morning we're supposed to say, it says, when you wake up in the morning, have a rotz ketzvi, you'll be nimble, quick like a deer, and gibur kairi, strong like a lion, and oz kanemer, strong, powerful like a leopard, and kal kanesher, and light like an eagle. So the question is, first of all, these animals are not kosher animals. Why suddenly are we learning things from animals? And to the extent the Torah even says, if Torah was not given, we would learn it from animals. That's an interesting comparison. The Torah was given, doesn't mean we don't learn it. The answer is, the Torah is telling us that God created nature for us to learn from nature. Whose nature is it? Who created these animals? Why is a cat particularly modest? Check out when cats, even when they leave their waste, or when they mate, they will always be extremely modest. Dogs are not that way. Every creature was created with features that God said you can learn from. Hashgacha pratis, everything's divine providence, and everything's part of a symbiotic world. And you can learn from every creature. Every creature has its lessons. Part of the whole process. So there's much to learn from how the universe breathes. As I said, nothing is closed organisms. It's all understanding that everything needs everything else. We humans are the only ones that have superimposed what we'll call a narcissistic view of life, where we could be self-contained. We'll meet other people when we want to meet them, when we don't want to meet them. The natural give and take that's supposed to exist in existence, because of our free will, because of the choice we have, we're able to mess around with that balance. There's a very famous medrash. It's actually a very profound one and very contemporary. Just to give a small introduction, you all know one of the big classic arguments about economic theory was between capitalism and Marxism. Later will become communism. And one of the key differences, whether we have an economy that's based on greed and selfish gain, and then allow the marketplace to determine the give and take, and there'll have to be the supply and demand, and there has to be a relationship with each other, but with inherent risks, inherent problems of greed, and the ones that have more will take advantage of those that have less. Or, as socialism argued, was that there should be no privatization of any property. Everything should be one big kuppah, one big, one big pot, and everyone gives what they can and take what they need. A very utopian vision that was very attractive to many people, especially Jews, but was not realistic. It didn't work. It wasn't viable. But the argument philosophically still remains. Capitalism versus socialism. And frankly, we don't really have a pure capitalism in this country. I don't think there are countries that have pure. Capitalism has been very much affected by socialist ideas, labor unions, workers' rights. Capitalism of 200 years ago, 150 years ago, was far harsher than it is today. So there's a certain so-called sensitivity that's been built in, a certain compensation, etc. That doesn't mean there isn't exploitation and there are many problems. But it's an interesting debate. I don't want to discuss that particularly. I was just saying it as an introduction. That Marx and the thinkers, the communist socialist thinkers, their argument was against the class struggle, as they call it. Why allow classes, middle class, lower class, upper class? It only creates divisiveness. They think they're better than the others. Let's eliminate the class system. Interestingly, Korach argued the same thing. He said to Moshe and Aaron, Kulam Gedeshim, Madua Tisnasa, why did you suddenly create a hierarchy, your leaders? We're all holy. We're all equally holy in the eyes of God. So there's an interesting medrash. If you want more on this topic, by the way, I once delivered a paper at Cambridge on this topic, and I wrote up a whole paper. It's online, called Wealth and Spirituality. What's the Torah's position? Is it capitalist or is it socialist? Because the Torah clearly advocates private property. Only a Kohen and a Levi don't own private property. On the other hand, the Torah is very strong with tzedakah, charity, which in a sense is like the antidote to selfishness. But if you want more on that, you can email my office and we'll send you the articles. But to go back to this medrash, I bring it there as well. So there's a famous medrash, David HaMelech, King David, once besieged God and asked God the following. He says, it says in the prophet that you, Li Akesav Li Azov Omer Na'um Hashem, God says, I have all the silver and all the gold, meaning that He has no limit in wealth. So Lama Barasat Aniyim Vashirim. Why did you create poor and wealthy? You had enough to go around. Why didn't you give everybody equal? You wouldn't have so much poverty, you wouldn't have all the pain and anguish of this class struggle, essentially. And God's answer was, just like David HaMelech quoted a pasuk, a verse, God also responded with a verse. He said, Chesed ve'emes ma yitzarua. Who then will do kindness and truth in this world? Who will give it? If I create everybody equally, there will be no chesed. That was his answer. And David HaMelech did not argue, so clearly he accepted the answer. What exactly is the answer? What was the meaning behind the answer? The meaning is the following. God is basically saying, and this is explained in many books, that the truth is, you're right. Everybody should be equal. Why should there one person more than another? But I want chesed. I want people to have the wisdom to give. So I will give some people more, that they should have the wisdom that it's not for them, that they're holding it, like they say, like a pakadon. They're holding it in trust. I'm trusting them that they will be wise enough not to be deceived into thinking that they earned it on their own. I just made it on my own. And they'll be wise enough to understand that I trusted them to be my distributor. And that way, they'll distribute, so everyone will have, and also there'll be chesed in this world. And some explain it, especially on a mystical level, Kabbalah and Chassidus, that it's basically the symbiosis of Mashpia and Mekabel that God created. Because the same is true not just with money, it's also true with wisdom. Everybody has something that another person doesn't have. As the Mishnah says, Ezu Chacham Haleimid Mikol Adam. Who's the wise person? The one that learns something from everyone. Which has two meanings. That means everyone has something to teach, and everyone has something to learn. There's actually an interesting, fascinating halacha, law, that says charity is not just an obligation for those that have. Charity, even a pauper has to give charity. Obviously, commensurate to what he has. Because there's no such thing as a person that doesn't have what to give. It's the dignity of a human being dictates you always have something to give, and you always have something to receive. Going back to Hillel's words, it may not nili mili. Everybody has a me, a li, a self, But if I'm only for myself, what am I? So you also have to think of it like a bunch of musical notes in a great grand composition. Every note is necessary, indispensable, and every note contributes to the other. So every note is necessary, this note, to play your note, not another. And all the other notes are aware of that. Like I mentioned before with nature, the human body. It's only the humans who are given free will that can convince themselves, I made this money, it's mine. It's my wisdom, it's my gift. What made Moshe Rabbeinu, the great Moses, that he says he was the humblest man that ever walked on earth? Explain, what means that he was the humblest man? He didn't know he had qualities. He didn't know God chose him to take the Jews out of Egypt, parting of the sea, to give the Torah, that Moshe would be Moshe. Of course he was aware. Humble means, it says, that he said to himself, these are not my gifts, God gave them to me. And had he given them to someone else, they would have done better than me. That's humility. Humility is not delusional. There's an expression in Hebrew, anav, is humble. A shafal in Hebrew means, a shafal means a person of low self-esteem. Don't confuse humility with low self-esteem. Moshe did not have low self-esteem. He knew exactly who he was. But he never thought he was not self-made. He knew it was a gift. And he knew that someone else had given it. He felt someone else may have done better. So shafal is a person who's demoralized and feels, I have nothing, I'm worthless. That's a doormat. Moshe Rabbeinu was not a doormat. He stood up he fought for his cause, but he always had that element. Even when Kairach challenged him, he turns to God. He had the humility. The point is that life, the structure of life is one of give and take, and that's healthy. However, we humans are the only ones given the free will to make that choice. And you look around the world today, if wealth was distributed equally by the wealthy, would we have poverty? Would there be anyone here that would be lacking? But the nature of narcissism, the nature of this material world is you want, and you want more and more and more. And this Oyev Kesef Lo Yizbeh Kesef, which means you love wealth, and you can never be satiated by it. It continues, it grows, the appetite grows. Only in the material world is there such a thing that's possible. It's just like we can overeat. Animals don't overeat. You'll never find an animal that overeats. It eats exactly what it needs and then it stops. That whole type of idea of self-indulgence, which essentially is the nature of the material world, is an unhealthy element. The ability to just take and not give. It's what's called a parasite. Or what we call in Yiddish or Russian or whatever the word is, piavke, a leech. It's like they go for the blood and they just take moitzi, machnis, ve'ena moitzi. They take and never give. So it's like the question, are you a taker or a giver? The healthiest people in the world are givers. The people who are happiest are givers. But the nature, most of us gravitate to taking. My theory of it is because we live in an insecure world and we think by taking makes you feel more secure. I'll have more and more and more. The fact is it doesn't add any security, but it's a delusion that more and more. The people who are the most secure people have no problem giving because they don't feel that if they give, they get less, they have less. They don't get diminished by giving. Now this is true, as I said, financially, it's true psychologically, it's true intelligently. We all have qualities, we all have blessings. So empathy, which is the midah, the emotion, the attribute of this week, is essentially the antidote to the selfish, self-contained, self-absorbed individual. Now, I'm not going to measure here anybody's self-absorption. I'm sure everybody in this room is most empathetic, and you're breathing well, and your give and take is perfect. Exhale and inhale all the time. But you may meet people out there that are not that way. And the story with the Rebbe Marash. Someone came to him and said, Rebbe, I have a friend who did something really horrible. He's ashamed to come to you, so he's asking a tikkun, he's asking me a suggestion, what can he do about it? So the Rebbe says to this guy, why would he expose himself to you? Why didn't he come to me and just say, I have a friend? In other words, sometimes when you want to have advice, it's about you. The best way to just say is so I have a friend that has this problem. So look, we do live in a world that is a materialistic world. As I discussed many times here, the mystical side of it is, the Arizal says there's a tzimtzum harishin. God created this unbelievable dark black hole that as much as you understand that you're connected to everyone around you, as much as you understand that it's healthy to give and take, The bottom line is something blinds us, and we just simply can't act on that awareness, even if you completely believe it. You see it all the time. You see people are absolute believers, but they all have an element of selfishness. How's that possible? You really believe that there's one God, and that material world will all die. Everyone knows. No one has ever figured out how to take their money with them. Nobody's ever figured out how to take any possessions, and yet people to the last second, to the last breath, are still fighting for. How's that insanity? Is because the material world has a hold on us that's unbelievably powerful, more than they'll ever imagine. Because it's God Himself that actually created it, so it's pretty much a divine delusion. So go fight with God who concealed the reality, the truth, and yet we're told we have the ability to pierce that. So when we look this week at the midah, at the emotion of Tiferes, and Chesed Shebet Tiferes, and Gvura Shebet Tiferes, and so on, what you're talking about is and looking at your ability to empathize. And I'm not talking about the natural empathy I mentioned before. Somebody's walking down the street, you see somebody, you suddenly feel bad for them. That may be very selfish, actually. It makes you feel good that you feel bad for people. And when you're not in the mood, you don't feel bad. I think I told the story here more than once about this guy that was here at this class. It was years ago. And I was speaking about the difference between good people and people who do good things. What's the difference between a good person and a person who does good things? It sounds like the same thing. Not exactly. A person who's a good person is 24/7 good. Even when he's asleep. Even when it's inconvenient. A person who does good things, when he's doing something good, he's doing a good thing. It doesn't mean he's a good person. What's the difference? So a guy came over to me after the class. He was in his early 50s. And literally, like with tears in his eyes, he said to me, I have to thank you. Tonight was a historical night for me. For the first time in my life, I understood something that I've been plagued by my entire life. He told me, he said, my father was a very big philanthropist. He was a big Baal Tzedakah. And everyone loved him. I remember, he passed away by now, and he said, I remember Tuesday night, anyone who came to our house, the door was open. For a loan, for tzedakah, for getting a job, for a favor. Nobody was turned away. Doesn't matter who it was. He said, which was, beautiful. You don't find many people like that. But he said, my father at the same time also had another side to him. He was very cruel to myself, to my mother, to our family. And if he came, God forbid, on Wednesday night, when he had his weekly poker game, nobody was let in, no matter what the emergency was. And as a child, you're confused by the mixed messages. Here you have a father that's unbelievable in one way. And here you have that he can do things that are completely opposite. And tonight he said, I understand the reason. He says, I don't take my father, the credit that he gets for what he did, I'm not questioning. But he did it at his terms. That was his habit. Maybe he learned the custom from his father. So I agree, it's a better habit than other habits. But it was when it was convenient for him, when he liked it. And if it was not convenient, he was not there. He says, so he did good things, I don't know if he was a good person. And it's an interesting distinction. And again, he was not knocking what his father had done, it just was a way of understanding it. And it's very true in many ways. Obviously, I should qualify, there are people who are good people, they never do good things. That's not exactly what I'm suggesting. Obviously, a good person is going to do good things at any given time. But it's a difference between whether you are doing it out of your convenience or it's your nature. Which again, is not always bad if it's a good thing, but it's limited. That's not true Tiferes. Because then, you have compassion when you like to have compassion, when you're in the mood, when it fits your agenda. And true compassion is when it's not necessary, you're not in the mood, and it's not so convenient. It's the ability to really transcend yourself and look at something with a compassionate look, even though you may not be exactly in that mood. So this week is the diagnosis, so to speak, the analysis of this element in each of us, in a deliberate way. Not just, we all have empathy when we like, in a deliberate way, which means that to work on yourself to actually develop an empathy, even if you're not in the particular mood of it, and with someone that's a stranger, not necessarily a friend, and maybe actually even a person that you consider your enemy. Now, obviously, I'm not suggesting in a way that can be destructive. To show empathy to someone that can hurt you And you take advantage is another story. Obviously, there's a thing called protection, self-defense. But it's not always that way. They tell the joke about these two old Jews. Their entire lives they were friends, best friends, partners, everything. And then as it goes, people get older. They got in some fight, and they ended up. God should help. As God's sense of humor goes, they ended up in the same nursing home. But they don't talk to each other. They're silent treatment. So someone came to them and said, you were friends your entire life. You're not going to live forever. Just make up. What's the big thing? What's now? You're no longer in business. You're sitting in a nursing home. And you know so much about each other. You just ignore each other all the time. So one of them said, no, if I make up with him, he'll think he was right. So what if he thinks he was right? But that's how people are. I remember I mentioned a zoo before, monkeys with peeling bananas. I'll tell you another one. In Ramat Gan in Israel, there's a very big zoo. Right? It's still there. Belleville. Yeah. So years ago, I took my children, we were in Israel, I took my children to the zoo. They were young kids. And in the zoo, there was an outdoor cage for gorillas. Apes. And on the sign, it said there was a sign on the cage, it said, in Hebrew, it said that, what's it called? Kufim ha'elu, whatever it's called. How do you say apes, gorillas? Kufim, yeah. Kufim ha'elu, mitnahalim b'regez zeim zeh kfar esrim v'shmeina shanim. That these two gorillas have a quarrel between them already for 28 years. That's what it says. And we're watching, and it's true. They don't look at each other. They don't talk to each other. They don't communicate with each other. One is female, one is male, obviously. And the male keeps trying to get the attention of the female. He throws a twig, and you can see she's furious. 28 years. All of us husbands and people, I'm sure, have experienced what's called a woman's silent treatment. But 28 years is a lot. 28 years they're carrying a breaker. So I remember my little. Huh? Yeah. I remember my son says to me, maybe while we're here, maybe we can create shalom bayis here. So I said, go for it. Maybe you could. So he threw a twig at her, and she started running around. There was actually a third gorilla in the third corner. I don't know what his role was, but maybe it was a child. I'm not sure. No, probably not. And it was very interesting to watch. It was very human. They really just have this thing. They just carry on. They don't even remember why they're angry at each other. That type of thing. So essentially, it's part of the comedy, the human comedy, obviously. And even though I said before, animals usually are not this way, but I guess some animals have. They probably learned it from humans, frankly, if you ask me. And I told you, there's a couple told me that they took they have dogs, and they took their dogs to the vet. They have today dog therapists. That's not a joke, by the way. And the therapist told them that the dog is experiencing at home a lot of tension, and that they should start not fighting so much because the dog is getting neurotic due to the tension of the man and the woman, the husband and wife. So I said all three of them need therapy now, together maybe. This is not a joke because, as a matter of fact, in Chazal it says, by the flood, it said the earth was so corrupt that God destroyed the earth, with the flood. Question is, why did He destroy animals? What did they do wrong? So it says the humans corrupted them. They also became corrupt, except the fish, because the fish were not within reach of humans. They're under the water. So the fish were the only creatures not destroyed. But animals became corrupt through humans. So there you have a source that we can actually corrupt animals. So the bottom line is this: that empathy is an unbelievable tool. It's a tool that teaches your soul how to breathe, how to see things not your way, to see things another way. And we're actually wired this way. There's mirror neurons. If you do not block out, if you do not put a mirror, and with this, what's the word that I wanted to say? When you put silver on the glass, I said, how do you put it? Smear. If you don't smear silver on the glass, and you're able to see another, we naturally have sensitivity to each other. That's how it is. You'll see people who are extremely sensitive, even when they say he couldn't even kill a fly, right? And that's not because they're meek or they're what they're called, weak-hearted. It's because there are people who are sensitive. They tell that story. I often tell this to one of the Rebbes when he was a little child. He was walking with his father in the garden. They were taking a walk, And the child, like a child, he ripped off a leaf from the tree and began to rub it. Who hasn't done something like that? And his father reprimanded him and said to him, God created this leaf. What right do you have to tear it off and take it away from its life and its journey, wherever it has to go, because you're just to rub it without thinking? And the son later grew up to be a Rebbe himself, and he said that it was one of the biggest lessons in his life, because we're talking about a leaf, let alone a creature, or let alone a human being. Moshe Rabbeinu and David HaMelech, how were they tested before they became leaders? So the first time Moshe is described in the Torah, it says he was a shepherd. And David Hayaroi, Moshe Hayaroi, David Hayaroi, shepherd. A shepherd of what? Not of souls. A shepherd of sheep. He was good, and he took care of the sheep of Yisrael, his prospective father-in-law. And it says that once a sheep ran away from the flock, and Moshe Rabbeinu realized, of thousands of sheep, he realized one little sheep, he ran after it, he found it near a brook of water, it was thirsty, and he carried it back on his shoulders. So God said, if a man can have such sensitivity to one sheep, no one's watching, who would even know? Him I trust with my people, with my children. And same thing with David HaMelech, how he fed the sheep and took care of the larger sheep, the younger sheep, etc., the ones that were... Again, lessons from animals. But the point is, sensitivity is even to a leaf. And actually in Torah there's a thing called Bal Tashchis. It's a serious crime. It's not a rabbinic ordinance. It's a from Mindaraisa, as they say, from the written Torah. Bal Tashchis means not to destroy. You're not allowed to destroy anything. You're not allowed to destroy even a stone, unless there's a purpose that has a holy, sacred purpose. As a matter of fact, there's even a saying, a Hasidic saying. They say when a wicked person walks on the street, the cobblestones cry out, "What right do you have to walk on me? We never transgressed. Why do you have your wicked feet are walking on me?" So the sensitivity and empathy to everything in existence, and obviously even more so to humans, is the focus of this week. And the thing is not about guilt or about, it's our responsibility to help others. You're doing more for yourself than for anyone else when you're able to see through a glass and not just see your own reflection all the time. It creates a healthy environment, give and take. I can tell you one of the best, and universally, even though I abhor so-called platitudes and giving people like what we call blanket suggestions, but I can tell you one suggestion that always works, no matter what problem you have in life. Find something to give. Become a volunteer, go help out needy children, give some tzedakah, find a cause, whatever it is, time, money. It is a guaranteed healer, always. Does it take away all the problems? But it opens up a whole new opportunity. And I can tell you many stories of people who never thought of doing something like that and changed their lives. Because what it does is, as I said, it creates breathing. It opens things up. This way you're always in. Everything is like inhaling. How much can you inhale? Exhaling means you give. And then you realize, hey, I'm good at this. I'm good at giving. And guaranteed a person always feels better after they give than after they take. For the moment, taking always feels better. But giving in the long term, always. Because it builds confidence. It shows you that you have the ability to do so. Things you may not have even known you had the ability to do. And just in general, it makes a organism, a breathing organism, which is always more alive. Try it out. Next time you have a challenge or a problem, take upon yourself something to give. I know it's like counterintuitive. You say, 1 second, I have a problem, now I have to be busy with myself all the time. Why are you telling me now to be busy with others? It's an interesting twist. Yeah, maybe that will work. It's like when a person has a tendency, when they're in a depressed state, what do they want to do? They want to lock themselves up in a basement. That's exactly what they shouldn't be doing. That's the nature, that's the inclination. The key is to bring fresh air. So that I can tell you, across the board, Tiferes, empathy, is always a healer. Because it opens up the pores, as they say. It allows things to breathe. It allows you to breathe. It allows you to see another perspective. How could that ever be bad? A fresh way of looking at things. Talk about people being bored and monotonous. What's more monotonous than just breathing the same recycled air all the time? So the idea of having something fresh means giving. Now, of course, I know many people just find fresh ways to be narcissists. That's not what I'm talking about, obviously. I'm talking about a new way to not just take in, but to give out. So each of the 7 days of this week have its particular personality of empathy. You can go through the book. We have it now in the app, online. If you want to get the daily emails, we do this as well. And if you focus, if you haven't been doing these exercises, just focus this week. Guaranteed. You let me know next week if it hasn't improved your life. It's one of the things that actually you can see visible change, visible progress, visible growth. So, in this week of empathy, may we all be more empathetic human beings. And like we say, Kol HaMarachem Al B'Yesav, everyone who has compassion on God's creatures, God has more compassion on us as well, because it opens up the channels. You open up channels one way, it always opens up new channels. They say every action has a reaction. And the converse is also true. Anytime you don't do something, nothing happens. Nothing happens. That sounds brilliant, right? Nothing changes. But what's the sign of insanity? Somebody that keeps doing the same thing and wants different results. As I always say, if you want different results, you have to do something different. If you think like you thought, and you say what you said, and you do what you did, what are you going to have? What you had. That's an original. Which basically means you want some shift, you have to make a shift. You keep driving in one direction, you're going to go in that direction. You want to change something, you have to change course. So, God should help us all that we should use this week and all these weeks of the Birur Hamidus, the refinement and enhancement and character development of our personalities and our spirits, to open up new channels, new opportunities, and discover new things about yourself, which is always an exciting project, to discover new dimensions. And with that said, I want to say again that the class is dedicated in memory of recent passing of Yecheskel ben Shendel, as well as Lahavdil ben Chaim L'Chaim to Velvel, your daughter's birthday. So we give you a happy birthday, right? Yes, we did. I gave her a whole thing about the birthday cake. And of course, any of you who have simchas should only celebrate well. If you want me to honor a birthday or any other special day, feel free to let me know. And everyone have a very empathetic and special, beautiful week, the week of Tiferes. Philip will be giving his class tomorrow evening, and if you haven't left your email address with us, please do so we can stay in touch. And until next Wednesday, when we do the next week, is the week of how well do you endure, I believe, which is Netzach. We'll do that next week. Thank you, and everyone be well.